Hi guys, it's Ariana. Welcome back to my channel. So for today's video, we are going to be reading some more scary stories. So sorry for the loud noises outside. As per usual, the cars will not stop going by. It is a holiday in Canada right now, so the road is incredibly busy because people are home and driving around and just being all around fucking annoying. So we're going to jump into this video as quickly as possible because I want to get through these stories without the loudness of outside interfering and pissing me off any further than I already am. Because I fucking hate living here. I have a few stories from a few different Reddit users that I want to read tonight. Some of them are really creepy and cool, and I'm very excited. So as per usual, I have my Wicked candle here, not lit. It's just the caramel apple one. I have a pumpkin spice latte ready to go. This look that I did tonight is up on my TikTok, so if you guys are interested in watching that scary story and seeing how I did this look, then go to my TikTok. All of my socials will be listed down below in my description box. My nails are from my friend Sam. She owns Scorpio Nails. I think that's how you say it. I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong, but it's like Scorpio Nails. She's in Canada here. She has an Etsy store, so she's linked down in my bio. And I do have a discount code for you guys, so you guys can save some money if you want to order some really awesome stick-on nails. So go to my description box down below for all my codes. And let's just jump on into the scary stories. The first one is a fairly long one, and I do want to let you guys know that there is a couple of trigger warnings in here. Trigger warning for suicide, trigger warning for eating disorders, trigger warning for basically everything that you may be triggered by. I'm going to leave you guys a little trigger warning here so that if you want to skip the story, I'll leave the timestamps down below so you guys can just skip to the next one. But this one is titled, My Childhood Friend is Haunting Me. On the first day of high school, I received a letter from my best friend letting me know that I was no longer cool enough to be her friend. It read kind of like a letter of termination from a job, and I later learned that it had been generic because it had been sent to 3 other people. This left me relatively friendless, and in retrospect, I was desperate to meet new people. Maybe that's why when a girl 2 years older than me with a shaved head and drawn-on cat whiskers told me she knew me from somewhere in my second class of the day, we were immediately attached at the hip. She was loud, vibrant, and probably the most fearless person I ever met. She was weird, make no mistake there, but her eccentricities only added to her charisma. She wore a Halloween costume corset half the time and sang show tunes out loud in the hallways. I'd always been a bit of a prude, and she had told me stories about drinking and boys. I was absolutely transfixed. Her name was Veronica. It wasn't but for the purpose of the story, it was that she got me hooked on musical theater, and I began writing songs about her. She was a firecracker. But with her high points, her beautiful, unstrained chaos, came equally intense lows. As we grew closer, she became to need me like I needed her. 14-year-old me was woefully unprepared to help her. How do you talk to someone through a pregnancy scare when you've never had a boyfriend? How do you help with an abusive parent or an alcohol addiction or an eating disorder when you're just barely out of middle school? I didn't stand a chance. We went on a school field trip once and stopped at a restaurant on the way home. She ordered the smallest meal she could and had admitted that if she had been alone, she probably wouldn't have eaten at all. I held her crying in my arms. She kissed me gently, still weeping, and I was afraid. So afraid of how that kiss had made me feel, terrified of being isolated by my peers. The next day I told my friends, and to avoid suspicion, my comments bordered on homophobic. I'm not proud of this, but I was clinging desperately to the hope that separating her from me would drag my peers' suspicions away. In doing so, I betrayed her at one of the worst times in her life. Our friendship recovered, but she was never the same. I watched her spiral in real time, watched as happiness turned to mania and sadness turned to depression. When I was 15 and she was 17, she told me about her coke binges, about self-harm, about sleeping with men just to feel something. At some point, she got a steady boyfriend, and when she told me that she was hitting him, it was the last straw for me. I told myself I wouldn't be her friend anymore. She reached out to me repeatedly, but I stopped responding. She cut off her other friends, broke up with her boyfriend, and early January, she waited until her mom had left for work. At the time, I had never been to a funeral. I don't know how many I've been to now, but a crowd of actual children dressed in black and giving eulogies for another child is something that has burned into my memory forever. Her parents were there. One of them told us that her untimely death was inevitable, that by being her friend, we'd simply brought them more time with her. I remember thinking that that was absolute bullshit. Each of us could have done something, had we had reached out more, had we had not betrayed her. I don't even remember the school year after that. It's a time in my life that's just gone, vanished, like she did. People look at you differently when you're in mourning. They act differently, especially as a teenager. People I've never spoken to reached out and gave their condolences. Looking back, I understand that it was what they thought I wanted, some kind of comfort, but I remember being frustrated by the attention and fake kinship. I remember wishing more than anything to be left alone, and I often retreated to the comfort of my bedroom just to avoid sympathy from anyone I knew. The isolation I felt was immeasurable. 4 months later, when I could speak her name without sobbing, I went back to my old notes. I went back to the ambitious musical my young self had started writing, the one based on her, starring her. That was the first night that it started. I had fallen asleep reading my old notes and was shaken gently by Veronica. She looked the same as I remembered, her dark shaved head, her wild, pale blue eyes. I was obviously bewildered, but I ultimately realized that accepting that she was there left me a lot happier than questioning why she would be. She smiled at me, cold hand still resting on my shoulder. Right, came a voice that sounded like wind. She hadn't opened her mouth. Silently, she picked up a paper from the stack that surrounded me, and the voice came again. Right. It was more forceful this time, more concrete, as if the first command had simply been to test her voice. And so I picked up the pencil and did. The song I had been working on was incomplete. I added a verse, and she stayed seated at the foot of my bed, watching and still smiling. I tested her verses and choruses, made notes in the margins about characters and staging. I would swear that as I wrote, I could see her eyes glowing. When I finished the song, I went back to my dreamless slumber, glancing every so often at the dead girl that sat at the foot of my bed, still smiling. I woke up the next day feeling like I hadn't slept at all. But this was nothing new. I hadn't slept well in months. I went to school and dealt with the pitying stares of my peers. In my third period, when the teacher was droning on, I couldn't bear to comprehend another word. I heard it again, clear as day. Right. I jolted upright. No one else seemed to notice the disembodied voice, but I realized that if it truly was Veronica, and what she really wanted for me was to write about her, I would oblige even if no one else heard her. I began the framework for a new song, a ballad for the character Veronica would have played. I wrote about her pain and found myself crying hot tears in class. The teacher gave me a glance that let me know they understood and dismissed me. After splashing some cold water in my face, I returned to class and paid attention to the lecture. That night, she was there again, when I fell asleep, but different. I couldn't put my finger on it until I stood up to get my notebook and realized that she was taller than me by a good few inches. In life, she had been almost exactly my height. Maybe she had appeared how she wanted to look, but then why would she keep her shaved hair that she hadn't liked, or the body she so desperately wished to be smaller? I let it go, chalking it up to simply misremembering. I hadn't stood next to her in months, so it made sense that the little details could be wrong. Like her eyes, just a shade too pale, or her hair, a bit shorter than it had ever been, and that eerie smile. Hers had always been warm, at least in death. Her smile was toothy and wide, unrelenting. A gesture of welcome, but not goodwill behind it. Could anyone other than me see you? I asked out loud. She was utterly silent. Is there any reason in particular you chose me? I asked again. Right. She commanded, and I obliged. I went back to the solo I had been working on earlier and revised some lyrics. She seemed happy with this, eyes again seeming to glow as I fell back asleep. It continued on for months. Any spare moment, the second my attention was not on whatever was at hand, I heard her. I trudged through junior year. I began to think of it as almost a gift. As someone who rarely has complete focus, the concept of a constant reminder to work on my project was all too enticing. I grew to appreciate her presence, feel almost comforted by it, and she grew in a different way. Every night, she seemed taller, proportionate still, but bigger and bigger, towering over me. She loomed at the edge of my bed, or sitting in the chair in the corner, or once hiding in my closet. She was omnipresent, and she was a welcome distraction from my grief. Life continued on. I trudged through my junior year and wrote every night, never getting any amount of genuine sleep. I was sluggish in school, and my grades were suffering from sheer exhaustion. When I was nearly happy with my music and lyrics and characters, I compiled them into a notebook. I gave them to the woman who now took up a whole corner of my room, and she flipped through it with her comically large hands. When she was done, her unnerving smile faltered and finally split into an equally bizarre mask of sadness. Are you really sure you're ready to be done? Veronica's stretched lips unmoving from her horrible frown. I realized 2 things. The first was that if I stopped writing, I would stop seeing her. The second was that she was right. The plot was one that was well written for a 14-year-old, but not by any means a professional. It felt like a child's story, oversimplified and dramatic without purpose. I looked up at her icy blue eyes. I didn't remember them looking that cold in real life, and took the notebook away, promising to do better. The summer before my senior year, I started a novel. It had a similar character to the musical, but the plot had been reworked into something that I thought seemed more articulate, more clear-cut. That night, I told her that I was beginning it. Her wide smile seemed even larger. I could practically feel her drinking in each word as I wrote. Her eyes glowed at the end of each night. Friends started asking why I was spending less time with them, and I had no way to tell them that my time was being taken up writing for my friend To what end? I had no clue. After 30,000 words, Veronica had to bend to fit into my bedroom. When she read my work at the end of each night, her smile grew somehow wider, and at this point, felt that I could very easily fit in her wide, gaping mouth. It was grotesque, in a way that was almost distracting. But her face remained beautiful, just wrong, no longer human. But I guess I never assumed the entity in my room was. When I came to the final chapter, I showed her the printed out pages, sitting still for a solid hour. At the end, her even larger mouth made the disturbing grimace. I remembered, and I knew what she was thinking. The writing had been good, but could always be better. The images in my head had been so clear, it was to assume everyone understood them as I described, and I sometimes lacked the detail that made a story realistic. The dialogue had been edgy and trying too hard to sound smart. When I thought about going back through, editing the hundreds of pages, a sting of pain filled me. I was so tired. I would have given anything to get a good night's sleep, but I persisted and continued to write for her. At some point, I thought that maybe a book was the wrong format altogether. I found that dialogue without description proved to be my strong suit, and I got into playwriting. I didn't write the same fictionalized account of her life, filled with fantasy, but a realistic timeline of our friendship and her death. At this point, I was in college. Each night, she filled my room, silent and smiling. Each night I wrote tributes to her. Each night I grew a little more afraid. The transformation had happened so slowly that it seemed natural, but she looked less and less human every day. Her eyes were blue dots in her head. Her mouth was endlessly wide and a toothy grin. Her face was poreless and smooth like a porcelain doll, but she had motivated me to do some of my best work, and her story was the first thing I could focus on. Didn't that give her some amount of credibility? Halfway through the newest play, 4 years after her death, I couldn't take it anymore. A long breaking point, I know, but I was scared that if I took a night off, she'd leave and wouldn't come back. Some rest would have been almost worth it. I bought a blindfold and noise-canceling headphones. I wrapped myself in a cocoon of blankets. I needed to get some sleep before it literally killed me. Ominous writing deadlines be damned. The moment I drifted off, I found myself in a beautiful park surrounded by trees. I looked up to find myself sitting on a bench next to a serene and very human-looking Veronica. The thing in my room looked clownish in comparison, a very poor replacement for her. She was warm to the touch, content and beautiful. She smiled, and I had no idea how I could call the thing cartoonish grimace a smile. I leaned in and finally hugged her. I didn't know where to begin now. She was finally here. I asked her if she was happy, and she reassured me that she was. I asked her if she'd seen what was going on in the world, and she said she hadn't. I asked her how that could be if she had been in my room every night, and that gave her a pause. She looked at me in a way I'll never forget. The same way my peers had looked at me whenever they saw me in the following year, pityingly. Listen to me. Whatever has been visiting you is not me. I hold no grudge, keep no burden that I held in life. The thing that keeps you writing about your pain is not doing so to help me, but to feed on you. I do not want you to wallow, but to thrive. With that, she kissed my forehead and walked away. I knew that it was our final goodbye, and made peace with it. A meaningful exit is not always a given. And until that point, the only closure I'd received had been from the thing that haunted my room. The park melted away around me, and I opened my eyes to see the ghoulish portrait of Veronica making eye contact with me. Right. The voice that was not Veronica's roared, and one last time, I did. I told the story of Veronica and her beautiful impact on my life, of the sadness that followed, and of the thing that kept me wallowing in sadness and self-pity. When I was fully and completely done, I handed the thing the handwritten paper and watched it read. Are you sure you want to end it here? Seems rather incomplete. The voice was nothing like hers. How could I have possibly believed this lie? I knew the answer was simply that I had wanted it to. Yes, I said simply. Pathetic, it cried, ripping the paper in half, clearly vying for rewrites. I don't care. I'm going back to sleep, I said. It looked at me with that drooping frown, practically melting off of its face. As I watched, it shrunk a foot. Poorly worded, it said, its voice a bit more panicked. It shrank again. Bizarre, just plain weird. It shrank again. Don't quit your day job, it wailed, about my height at this point. My silence was deafening. It shot downward, smaller and smaller, as its insults grew into meaningless threats and eventually just screaming. When it was small enough, I crushed it under my notebook like a bug and swept the remains into the trash. Veronica, the real Veronica, was dead. But wherever she was at peace. When I was finally able to sleep, I'd see her ever so often in dreams. She looked happier than she had in life. I truly hoped she'd meant what she had said about releasing the earthly burdens. When I finally found the distinction between wallowing and honoring, I found myself inspired to create something new. And that's how they ended the story. Holy shit, okay, we're at 19 minutes already. That was a really, really long story, so I think I'm just gonna read one more story after that because this video will be quite long. But that one was really, really good. It was really well worded, so thank you so much. I didn't tell you who the author was. I'm gonna tell you guys now. So the author was Archie Nem, so thank you so much to Archie Nem for allowing me to read your story. That was amazing. It was really, really creepy, and just honestly, it was really good. So thank you so much. That was from the no sleep section. So I'm gonna read somebody's personal paranormal experience. So this is from the subreddit Ghost Stories, and this is from the Reddit author Jinri. I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. I'll post all of the authors in my description box down below so you guys can go follow along, or you guys can read their other stories, but let's just jump into it. Sorry for the loud noises. Loud ass fucking cars. I cannot wait until winter comes and they shut the fuck up and nobody wants to leave their house so they don't drive past my house. So much better. I always believed I was sensitive to the paranormal and had a heightened sixth sense. My father's family came from a very dark background. I could sense that my grandmother was a very evil woman. The biggest sign was always the emptiness and evil I could see deep in her eyes whenever she looked at me. It wasn't until a few years back I was proven myself right. My parents left to live and work in another country while my older brother and I were being taken care of by our grandmother. We stayed with her in our parents' house for about 2.5 years, and the amount of paranormal that started happening ever since she moved in is absolutely insane. The room that me and my brother used to share at that time was to stay away from at all costs for me. I started sleeping in my living room every single night because of the amount of negative and darkness I would feel being even near that room. Mind you, I never felt anything like that until my grandmother moved in. It was this dreadful, dark feeling of something creeping behind me and watching over me whenever I would step inside the room or stand near it. Every time I would walk next to it, I felt like I was being watched. I would get chills all over my body, and the thing I would do is close the door and rush back to the other side of the house. For some reason, I would constantly find that door wide open, even when I was alone in the house. Many times, I caught my grandmother being furious about me closing the door. It seemed very suspicious, as it was such a small, dumb thing to get mad over. This was only in the beginning of our experience with her. I would have constant nightmares, which would make me sob after I woke up. They were terrifying, and after some time, I felt very unsafe in that house. I would wake up to horrifying loud slams in the middle of the night. They seemed to happen right next to me, and sometimes very far away. It would happen for a week straight, and I would start checking the doors, but they were always closed. That eventually stopped, and I continued having frequent nightmares. I started finding my grandmother sleeping in the living room near me. It was quite scary, as I would find her sitting straight up, looking at me, or the wall in the middle of the night. I would often wonder if she slept at all. It was very terrifying for a 13-year-old me back then, waking up from a nightmare at 3 in the morning to my grandmother staring at me, wide awake or silently looking at the wall. Sometimes I would talk to her and try to ask why she can't sleep. However, I would never get a response. One night, I had this nightmare in which everything was the same. I was sleeping in the room with her. In the dream, I woke up and started getting close to her as she was asleep. I felt like I was going to hit her for some reason. As I was about to do it, in the dream, she opened her eyes, grabbed my hand, and then I woke up. I turned to my side and actually saw her staring back at me, wide awake with this furious look on her face. I started questioning everything at that moment. I was terrified. Not long after that, I started finding these weird-looking objects all around the house. The thing was, they were always black, and I would find them in the weirdest places. It's as if they were being hidden. One day, as I was taking a shower, I noticed one of the objects on the water heater, which was very high up. I asked my grandmother to have a look and to take it down, and she got angry, cussed me out, and pushed the object even deeper. I knew that there was no way for me to get it myself, so I just let it go. There was another weird experience with her. One day, I was at the gym, and because I had eaten very little in the past few days, I passed out mid-workout. I decided to call it a day, go home, and relax. As soon as I got home, my grandma was all over me, asking me if I was okay and how I was feeling. I was really weirded out by this and asked her why she thought there was something wrong. She had told me that in the day, almost around the same time I passed out at the gym, she had blacked out where she couldn't see anything and everything was black. That was one of the weirdest experiences I had with her, which made me the most scared of. Throughout my entire childhood, I was told by everyone that she used to do very bad things to people and that she practiced witchcraft. I started being afraid for my life at some point. Why and how did she know that I had passed out at the gym? Why did she also have a blackout? I was worried that my own grandmother had cursed me and linked herself to me. I have no explanation for any of the experiences, and I still don't have any answers until this day. I was always depressed and terrified around her. always felt as if she was draining all the positivity from me. The entire period we stayed with her was the most anxious and depressed I've ever felt. And that's how the end of the story. So it sounds like your grandmother was like channeling you and just weirdly attached to you in like a very spiritual, strange way. There's no explanation I can give you as to why you would faint and she would faint at the exact same time without you guys being connected some way. That's so fucking scary. No thank you. Oh my God. So those are the two stories that I wanted to read today. I have another story that I want to read, but it's another fairly long one, and this video is already at the 27-minute mark, so this is where I'm going to stop it today. A couple people have commented in my comment section down below saying that you guys like longer style videos and longer style stories, so I hope that these stories were good enough. I do have a couple more that I want to read, and I will be reading in the next couple of days, but I'm just going to stop here because we're already at the 30-minute mark, and I hope you guys enjoyed. So if you guys did enjoy this video, please make sure to give it a big thumbs up. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below for more content like this, and I will see you guys at the next video. Bye!